July 7th, 1968, 3:58 p.m., Woodlawn Cemetery, Bronx. In front of 100 men who make New York move when it's supposed to stand still, Nicky Barnes drops a match on $500,000 in cash and watches it turn into smoke. The dead king is already in the ground, the throne is already empty, and the fire is the only crown he's willing to wear, until the people who really own New York decide whether to let him live long enough to sit. The money catches fast, too fast, like it's been waiting its whole life to become something else. Bills curl and blacken, edges glowing orange, then collapsing into ash. Heat pushes outward in a wave, and the smoke comes up thick, bitter, expensive, ink and paper and pride burning in the open air. The crowd doesn't breathe right. A few men step back, not from the heat, but from what it means. Nobody wants to be too close to a decision that loud. Barnes stands at the cemetery gate, not at the grave. That's the detail everyone will repeat later, because it's the detail that makes it a warning. He didn't burn the cash beside Bumpy Johnson like an offering. He burned it at the exit like a toll, like he's charging the living to leave. A black Cadillac Fleetwood sits at the curb with its engine running, exhaust faint in the summer air. Two of Barnes's guys are near it, pretending to be calm, eyes scanning the street the way men scan water when they know something is swimming under it. Behind Barnes, the funeral crowd gathers in a loose semicircle. Harlem numbersmen in dark suits, nightclub owners who pretend their hands are clean, politicians who came to be seen near power, and a handful of Italians standing a little apart like they don't want the smoke on their clothes. In the middle distance, Frank Lucas's people are there too, quiet, polished, watching like they're at a show they didn't buy tickets for. Barnes doesn't look at the grave again. Bumpy's casket is already down. Dirt is already on wood. That part is finished. The next part is his. A man with a thick neck and a silver pinky ring, Italian, clean haircut, shoes that never touched Harlem dust, steps closer. Not close enough to be threatened, just close enough to be noticed. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. His stare asks one question. Who told you you could do this? Barnes meets the stare across the fire. He holds it like he's holding court. Then he turns his head slightly and speaks to nobody and everybody at once. Respect ain't a feeling, it's a price. Someone laughs under their breath, sharp with disbelief. Another man mutters, "He's out of his mind." Barnes hears it. He lets it live, because the quickest way to make a rumor real is to argue with it. He tosses another bundle onto the flames, watches it flare, then steps back, slow, controlled. Frankie Bells is at his shoulder, face tight, voice low. "Nick," Frankie says, "you're burning your whole future." Barnes doesn't look at him. "No," he says, "I'm buying it." Frankie swallows. "You know what happens now." Barnes finally glances at him. "Yeah," he says, "now everybody stops guessing." The last of the cash collapses into ash. Barnes closes the empty canvas bag and drops it on the fire, too, letting it catch like a final signature. He turns away from the smoke and starts walking toward the waiting cars, and the crowd parts without being asked. It's subtle. It's instinct. It's the same thing Barnes remembered from when he was a kid watching Bumpy step out of a car, space opening like the street itself is afraid to touch you. Barnes feels it and keeps his pace even, because if you show you enjoy it, you're already losing. The funeral procession has one more stop. Harlem doesn't end anything with dirt. Harlem ends things with witnesses. At 5:21 p.m., the crowd is back at St. Martin's Church in Harlem, heat trapped under the high ceiling, the air thick with perfume and sweat, and the leftover grief people didn't know what to do with. The pastor says the final words like he wants to get out alive. The organ hums low. Shoes squeak against the floor. People shift, restless, because they've already seen the real sermon outside the cemetery gate. Barnes sits 3 pews from the front, hands folded, posture quiet. If you didn't know him, he could pass for a respectful young man paying tribute. If you did know him, you could feel the tension coming off him like static. Frank Lucas is not sitting near him, but Barnes knows where Lucas is without turning his head.
You learn that skill when you grow up around men who smile with knives behind their teeth. The pastor finishes. "Amen," he says, and the word lands like a fragile lid on a boiling pot. Barnes stands before anyone can move. The room freezes in a way that has nothing to do with religion. He steps into the aisle, not rushing, not asking. He faces the crowd. Harlem first, then the Italians in the back, then Lucas's people along the side. Bumpy Johnson kept this place together, Barnes says. His voice isn't loud, but it's sharp. It cuts through murmurs. He kept the wolves outside. Now the door's open. A ripple runs through the room. A few heads turn toward the Italians automatically, like the word wolves has an address. Barnes continues. "I'm not asking for permission," he says. "I'm telling you, from today on, Harlem answers to me." A man somewhere behind him lets out a short laugh, angry, disbelieving. "Who crowned you?" someone calls. Barnes doesn't search for the voice. Searching looks uncertain. He answers into the air. "I did," he says, "right outside." The Italians don't move. Their stillness is its own kind of statement. Lucas doesn't move either. Barnes can almost feel Lucas's smile without seeing it, the kind of smile that says, "Let him talk. Talking gets men killed." Barnes lifts his chin a fraction. "If you think I'm joking," he says, "test it." He steps back into the pew like he didn't just declare war in a church. He sits. The room breathes again, but not normally. People start to stand, to shuffle toward the exits, whispering hard. Eyes follow Barnes like he's a lit fuse. Outside, the late afternoon sun hits the street and makes the parked cars shine. Barnes's Cadillac is at the curb. Leon, his driver, has both hands on the wheel. Frankie opens the rear door. As Barnes slides in, Frankie leans close, voice tight. "You just challenged everybody, including people who don't lose." Barnes looks straight ahead. "Everybody was coming anyway," he says. "I just gave them an address." The car rolls away. The phone rings at 6:03 p.m. 2 rings, a pause, then 2 rings again. Barnes answers on the second ring, because answering too fast looks hungry, and answering too slow looks scared. "Yeah," he says. A calm voice with Italian edges says, "Nicholas." Barnes's eyes narrow slightly. "Talk. You made a show today, a disrespectful show." Barnes watches Harlem slide by through the tinted glass. Kids on stoops, men on corners, women carrying groceries like normal life is still legal. Disrespect would have been letting him go in the ground like he was nothing, Barnes says. A pause. "Burning money doesn't make you a boss." Barnes's mouth tightens to something close to a smile. "It makes me visible," he says. "Visibility matters right now. Visibility gets men killed. So does invisibility. So does invisibility," Barnes says, quick, clean. Silence. Then, "Tomorrow night, 9:30, Rouse, East 114, come alone." Rouse, a little restaurant with red sauce and old rules, Italian territory, an invitation and a warning in one sentence. "I'll be there," Barnes says, "but don't confuse alone with unprotected." The voice cools. 72 hours, Nicholas." "For what?" Barnes asks, though he already knows. "To prove you can hold what you grabbed." Click.
Barnes lowers the phone slowly. Frankie turns around in the front seat, face pale. "They gave you a deadline," Frankie says. Barnes stares out the window. "They gave me a test," he replies, "and tests are where you separate talk from weight." Leon's voice is quiet, almost flat. "What if they don't want you to pass?" Barnes doesn't answer immediately. He watches a patrol car crawl past a corner like it's hunting without admitting it. Then he says, "Then I make them regret wanting me to fail." That night, Barnes doesn't sleep. He sits in a back office above a liquor store on 116th Street, a map of Harlem spread across a desk scarred by old deals. He writes names in pencil because ink is too permanent and Harlem changes fast. He circles clubs, bars, numbers spots, corners where crews stand. He draws lines between men who hate each other and men who pretend they don't. He marks debts. He marks weaknesses. Frankie brings him scraps of information the way other men bring prayers. "Curtis at Purple Manor," Frankie says, tapping a name. "He's been skimming.
Not much, just enough to see if you notice. Barnes nods. He's testing air. This one, Frankie continues, hesitating, been meeting with Lucas's people. Barnes looks up. Who? Frankie says a name that lands heavier than the Italians call. Close, familiar. A man who aided Barnes's table and laughed too loud, the kind of laugh men use to prove loyalty they don't have. Barnes doesn't react outwardly. He writes the name down and presses the pencil hard enough to snap the lead. Frankie watches him. You want me to handle it? Barnes shakes his head once. I'll handle it, he says. I want him to see my face when he decides whether he wants to live. The next morning, July 8th, 10:14 a.m., Barnes walks into Purple Manor while it's still cleaning up from last night. The club looks sad in daylight, like an actor without makeup. Curtis, the owner, forces a smile behind the bar. Nick, Curtis says, early for you. Barnes places both palms on the bar and leans in. You've been shorting me, he says. Curtis laughs nervously. What are you talking about? Barnes slides a ledger page across the bar. Dates, numbers, clean proof. Curtis's smile collapses. Barnes keeps his voice calm, almost gentle. You thought Bumpy dying meant you could breathe, he says, but you forgot something. Curtis swallows. Nick, I can fix. You can, Barnes says, right now. And you're going to tell me who told you to try me. Curtis's eyes dart around the empty club like he expects a savior to appear. None does. Nobody told me, he lies. Barnes's tone sharpens by half a degree. Say it, he says. Curtis exhales like a man letting go of a cliff. A guy from Lucas, he whispers. He said you'd be too busy playing king. Barnes nods slowly, as if he's receiving a weather report. Busy, he repeats. He turns his head slightly. Frankie, he says, take what he owes, all of it. Curtis jerks. All? Barnes looks at him, eyes steady. You want the lights on, he says. Remember who pays for the darkness. He leaves without a punch, without a scream. That's the point. Violence is loud. Control is quiet. Curtis will tell everyone Barnes took his money without spilling a drop, and it will scare them more than if Barnes had broken his jaw. That afternoon, Barnes goes to Edgecombe Avenue, to the apartment of the man Frankie named. The hallway smells like fried onions and old paint. A cartoon is playing inside. Barnes knocks once. The door opens, and the man freezes. Nick, the man says, voice too high. What's up? Barnes smiles without warmth. We're going to talk out here, he says. In the hallway, Barnes stands close, not touching, letting the air do the threatening. I heard you've been meeting new friends, Barnes says. The man tries to laugh. Come on, Nick, it was just talk. Barnes tilts his head. Then you'll talk again, he says. Tonight you call them, you set a meet, you tell them you're ready, and you bring me names. The man's eyes widen. They'll know. Barnes's tone sharpens by half a degree. If you don't do it, he says, you won't need to worry about them. A long beat. The man nods, trapped by fear, held in place by the life he built inside that apartment. Barnes turns and walks away before the man can bargain. Bargaining turns betrayal into conversation. Barnes doesn't negotiate with betrayal. At 9:30 p.m., Barnes sits in the back room at Rayo's, a narrow space where the walls feel like they've been listening for 50 years. 3 Italians sit across from him. The older one has silver hair and a calm face that looks carved. The thick-necked one has the pinky ring. The younger one taps a cigarette like impatience is a personality. The older man speaks first. Nicholas, you made noise. Barnes sits back, hands visible. Silence makes rent, he replies. The thick-necked one leans forward. 72 hours, he says. No bodies, no headlines. You keep Harlem orderly. Barnes nods once. I keep it orderly, you stay out of it. The older man's eyes narrow a fraction. Don't confuse permission with respect, he says. Earn both. Barnes leans forward slightly. I didn't burn $500,000 to ask for permission, he says. The younger Italian's chair shifts. Watch your mouth. Barnes's voice is quiet and sharp. My mouth isn't the problem, he says. Your reach is. For a moment, the room tightens like a knot about to snap. Then the older man lifts a hand. The younger man goes still immediately. Barnes clocks that. That small gesture is more dangerous than any raised voice. The older man slides a card across the table. If you need help keeping order, he says, call. But if we see chaos, we don't call, we come. Barnes takes the card without looking at it. Understood, he says. As Barnes stands to leave, the older man adds, almost kindly, bravery looks a lot like stupidity when it's dead. Barnes pauses at the door. Stupidity is thinking Harlem is a rental, he says. Then he leaves. Back in Harlem, July 9th, Barnes makes his public move without turning it into a shooting. He uses exposure instead of blood, because blood makes headlines, and headlines make deadlines into funerals. At 7:55 p.m., he walks into Small's Paradise on 135th Street while jazz is playing and people are laughing like the city isn't sharpening knives. Barnes steps straight to the stage and signals the band to stop. Music stutters, then dies. The crowd murmurs, annoyed. Barnes holds up a small tape recorder like it's evidence in court. Everybody's been trying to buy Harlem, he says, trying to rent it like it's furniture. He hits play. Voices fill the club. Lucas's men, smooth and confident, offering money, offering protection, talking about Harlem like it's a product. The room changes as the words land. Heads turn. Eyes search the crowd for who belongs to those voices. Barnes stops the tape. Silence sits heavy. This is what disrespect sounds like, he says. If you're working with outsiders, leave now. If you stay, you're staying with me. Nobody moves at first.
Nobody wants to be the first to confess. Barnes lets the pause stretch until it hurts. Then one man stands and slips toward the exit. Another follows. Then two more. A small line of men leaving with their eyes down. Barnes watches them go and doesn't stop them. The point isn't punishment. The point is making sure everyone sees who chose wrong. When the door closes, Barnes nods once. Good, he says. Now the rest of you, enjoy your night. He signals the band. Jazz returns. People start dancing again, but it's nervous dancing, like relief with a bruise under it. Barnes has proved he can pull splinters out of Harlem without setting the whole block on fire. At 10:32 p.m., the Italian voice calls. We heard, the man says. Barnes answers, you should have. You handled a problem without chaos, the voice says. Harlem stays yours. For now. Barnes doesn't celebrate. For now, he repeats. Don't make us regret it, the voice says. Barnes hangs up and exhales once. He passed their test, but he knows tests don't stop. They just change form. Over the next months and years, Barnes builds his empire the way disciplined men build power, quietly, efficiently, without applause. He stops being a man people talk about and becomes a system people operate inside. He doesn't need to threaten every day. He needs to be predictable in the ways that matter. Pay on time, punish quietly, reward publicly just enough to keep loyalty alive. He strengthens his crew. He picks men who aren't drunk on ego. He uses fear sparingly because fear burns fast. He prefers obligation because obligation lasts. He also does the thing that makes him truly dangerous. He stops depending on anyone else's supply. In late 1968, Barnes starts meeting a Brazilian fixer named Paulo in bland Manhattan offices above travel agencies and import businesses where nobody asks questions if the rent is paid. Paulo smiles too much and talks too fast, but his eyes are always calculating. Barnes doesn't like him, but Barnes doesn't need to like a door. He just needs it to open. You want quality, Paulo says one night, tapping ash into a saucer. Everybody wants quality. Quality costs. Barnes leans in. Everything costs, he says. I'm not afraid of cost. I'm afraid of dependence. Paulo chuckles. You talk like a businessman. Barnes's face stays flat. I am, he says. I just don't file. They talk in frameworks, not instructions. Routes, intermediaries, paperwork that can be made to look like something else. People who can be paid to see nothing. Barnes keeps it compartmentalized. No one man holds the whole chain. He learns from the Italians without being Italian. Structure is safety. By 1969, the product on Barnes's street is different, cleaner, stronger. It sells faster and makes more money with less noise because quality changes behavior. People stop complaining. They start seeking. Barnes doesn't advertise. Harlem advertises for him. Money thickens. Influence grows. The neighborhood's rhythm shifts. The men who used to laugh at Barnes's cemetery fire now avoid his eyes when they see him because they've realized the fire wasn't madness, it was forecasting. Montage doesn't happen with music in Harlem. It happens with receipts and small, specific moments. May 3, 1969, 2:19 a.m., Barnes sits in a Lincoln outside the Apollo Theater while a nervous clerk hands him patrol patterns in exchange for an envelope heavy enough to bend.
Barnes thanks him politely. The clerk leaves shaking anyway, because polite gratitude from a man like Barnes feels like a leash. August 17th, 1969, 11:44 p.m. In a crowded club, a rival tries to recruit one of Barnes's runners. Barnes walks up, hugs the runner like family, and slips him a gold watch in front of everyone. The rival backs off without a word. In Harlem, gifts are threats wearing jewelry. December 2nd, 1969, 6:06 p.m. A preacher's wife whispers names to Barnes in a church vestibule. Men who gamble too much, men who cheat too openly, men whose secrets can be turned into leverage. Barnes leaves a donation and walks away with control hidden inside holiness. By 1970, Barnes is king in the only way that matters. When trouble happens, people come to him, not the police, not the Italians, not Lucas. That's the definition. Power is where problems go to die. Frank Lucas remains a shadow on the edge of Barnes's story. Sometimes their crews brush shoulders. Sometimes money shifts hands. Sometimes a rumor travels that Lucas is planning something big, then nothing happens because Lucas, for all his swagger, respects one truth. Harlem doesn't like two kings at once. The Italians watch Barnes too, but they don't interfere as long as Harlem stays profitable and quiet. That's the deal Barnes understands. They didn't hand him a crown. They handed him a leash with slack. Barnes keeps that leash slack by staying in the background. No interviews, no flashy cars on every corner, no need to be seen. He becomes a rumor again, the way real power prefers. And then, after a few years of doing everything right, Barnes does one thing wrong for the dumbest reason in the world. He gets hungry for applause. It starts small. A suit that fits too perfect, a watch that catches light, a night at a club where he stands a little closer to the dance floor than he needs to. He tells himself it's strategy, visibility as control, like the cemetery fire. But strategy can turn into vanity without changing its clothes. Winter, early 1970s, a public event in Manhattan. Charity, champagne, famous faces, politicians and criminals pretending they don't know each other's names. The ballroom is bright with chandeliers and white tablecloths. People smile too much. Laughter is practiced. The air smells like expensive perfume layered over ambition. Barnes arrives late wearing a fur coat that could buy a brownstone. Not because he needs warmth, because he wants the room to look. And the room looks. Men whisper. Women glance. Even the waiters do a double take. Barnes feels the old thrill, space opening, attention pouring like whiskey. He smiles, he shakes hands, he lets himself be a symbol again. Across the ballroom, a man stands near the bar holding a drink he doesn't touch. Detective Robert Bobby Carver, not a legend, not famous. Hungry. The kind of detective who doesn't chase headlines, he chases cases. His eyes lock on Barnes like Barnes is the only honest thing in the room. Barnes feels it before he fully sees it, the sensation of being pinned. He turns his head slightly and catches Carver's stare. For a second, the music and laughter fade in Barnes's mind. He understands, in a clean, cold flash, that the game just changed. Carver's mouth curves into a small smile, like he just found the crack he's been hunting. Barnes looks away first, not of fear, but of contempt. He refuses to acknowledge that a detective's attention matters. That refusal is the real mistake. It's deeper than the coat. It's the moment Barnes starts believing he's untouchable again. After that, Carver doesn't kick down doors. He tightens loops. He listens, he watches, he questions bartenders, doormen, clerks, people who see everything and get paid to say nothing until someone offers more. He finds men who resent Barnes, men who owe Barnes, men who fear Barnes. He collects small pieces that look harmless alone and become lethal when stacked. Barnes senses pressure creeping in, unfamiliar faces on corners, club owners acting strange, runners suddenly forgetting names, Frankie bringing bad news with tired eyes. Carver's sniffing, Frankie says one night, voice low. He's asking about you like he already knows. Barnes forces calm into his voice. He doesn't know, he says. Leon, quiet as ever, speaks from the corner.
Somebody's feeding him, he says. Barnes looks at him. Who? Leon shakes his head. Could be anybody, he says. The Italians, Lucas, your own people trying to save themselves. Barnes feels anger rise, then pushes it down. Anger makes you loud. Loud makes you easy. He tries to disappear again. Less public appearances, more distance, more layers. But once you teach the world to look at you, it's hard to teach it to stop. And Carver doesn't need Barnes to be loud now. Carver has a direction. That's all a hungry detective needs. The knock comes early one morning. Heavy, official, impatient. 6:27 a.m. Barnes opens the door to a hallway crowded with suits and uniforms. Carver stands in the center holding a warrant like it's a prize. "Mornin', Mr. Barnes," Carver says politely. Barnes keeps his face calm. Detective. Carver's eyes flick over him, taking inventory. "You've been hard to catch," Carver says.
"But you've also been easy to find." Barnes doesn't answer. Answering is volunteering. Carver leans in a little, voice low enough to feel personal. "That coat," he murmurs. "You wore it like you wanted applause." Barnes's eyes tighten for a fraction of a second. Carver sees it and straightens. "We're coming in," Carver announces. They search. They take ledgers, scraps of paper, phone numbers, envelopes with names written in pencil. They take anything that can become a story in court. Barnes watches without reacting because reacting is giving them what they want. He keeps his breathing steady. He keeps his shoulders relaxed. He refuses to be small. When they finish, Carver nods like he's concluding a business meeting. "You're coming with us." Barnes kisses his girlfriend on the forehead as she stands trembling in the doorway, holding her breath like breath might keep him there. He whispers something to her that he never repeats. Then he walks out in cuffs with his head high, because pride is the last thing they can't confiscate unless you hand it over. In the weeks that follow, Barnes sits in rooms that smell like bleach and paperwork. Lawyers talk in careful phrases. Prosecutors talk in numbers. Barnes hears the length of his life reduced to years like it's a bill. Carver visits one afternoon at 3:18 p.m. in an interview room with a metal table bolted to the floor. Carver sets a folder down slowly, savoring the moment like it's dessert. "I got enough to bury you," Carver says. Barnes leans back. "Then bury me." Carver slides out photographs, meetings, faces, places, moments Barnes assumed belonged to Shadow. Carver slides out statements, transcripts, clean lines drawn around messy lives. Barnes scans them without flinching, but inside he feels something cold settle, the realization that his carefulness wasn't enough. Someone talked. Someone always talks. Carver watches Barnes like he's studying a performance. "Here's what you don't understand," he says. "You think you're a businessman. You think you're a king, but you're a case, and cases close." Barnes looks up. "You want something," he says. Carver smiles. "I want the table," he says. "The structure, the names that matter, Italians, connections." Barnes's mouth tightens. "You want me to sing." Carver shrugs. "I want you to live," he says. "Or at least I want you to get out someday." Barnes sits in silence and feels the weight of the choice pressing on his ribs. Loyalty versus survival. Pride versus time. He thinks of the cemetery fire and how it made him untouchable for a moment. He thinks of the ballroom fur coat and how it made him visible in the wrong way. He thinks of Harlem moving on without him, because Harlem always moves on. "If I talk," Barnes says, "I'm dead." "If you don't," Carver replies, "you're dead slower." Barnes lets out a short, bitter laugh. "You cops always talk like you're saving somebody." Carver's expression doesn't change. "I'm not saving you, I'm using you." Barnes nods, appreciating the honesty even as it disgusts him. He leans forward. "Bring me my lawyer," Barnes says. Carver's smile grows a fraction. "Smart." After that, the dominoes fall, quietly at first, then all at once. Men who once ate loud in restaurants start slipping through back doors. Old alliances rot. Some people disappear into distance. Some people appear in courtrooms looking smaller than they ever looked on a corner. The Italians rage, but rage doesn't erase paper. Lucas keeps his head down, because even sharks know when the water has nets. Harlem hears the rumors first, then the confirmations, then the new silence. Barnes becomes, in the eyes of the street, something worse than a fallen king, a witness. And yet, in a darker, colder way, he also becomes something Harlem understands, a survivor. Years later, people will tell the story like it's only about the fire at the cemetery gate, the $500,000 turning to smoke while men watched with their mouths half open,
They'll call it madness. They'll call it genius. They'll call it the moment Harlem changed hands. Barnes knows better. The fire was a beginning. The real ending started when the fire worked, when it gave him a taste he couldn't forget. Not money, not even power, attention. Because real power doesn't need applause. Real power doesn't need a spotlight. Real power sits back and lets other men take pictures of themselves. And the moment you start wanting the room to look at you, you stop seeing who's looking back. That's the price Barnes paid. Not in cash, in time, in trust. In the slow, quiet realization that the loudest thing he ever did wasn't burning $500,000 in daylight. It was thinking he could do it twice and still remain invisible.